Not everyone born into a family truly has a place to call home. Some children grow up around full dinner tables but are never given a voice. Some sisters are always favored while others are constantly told to be the reasonable one. Talia Monroe was that kind of person, unassuming, undemanding, never causing trouble. She wasn't a dreamer, nor did she wait for miracles. Talia simply believed that if she worked hard, lived kindly, and helped, when it mattered, good things would eventually come. But in a family where kindness was taken for granted, silence was mistaken for submission, and love was always tied to one-sided responsibility, it was the one who knew how to sacrifice who ended up being pushed out first. This story began with a casual suggestion to stay and help your parents for a while, and ended with a quiet 7 a.m. move-out, when she left the place once called home, taking with her silence, self-respect, and a secret worth $500,000. This isn't a story about someone who walked away. It's the journey of someone who finally chose to come home to herself. Talia Monroe graduated with a degree in software engineering and a secured job offer from Quantum Grid Technologies, a mid-sized tech company known for its cutting-edge cybersecurity projects. Unlike many of her peers still scrambling for interviews or job openings, Talia had a stable position lined up since her final year of college. Her starting salary was enough to rent a small apartment near downtown East Haven, cover all her living expenses, and even set aside monthly savings. But all her plans took a sharp turn during what seemed like a warm family dinner. Over a simple meal featuring their usual grilled pork, her mother casually made a suggestion, her eyes holding a quiet hope for something more than mere agreement. "Your father and I were thinking, maybe you could stay home a little longer, would that be okay?" she said, gently placing more vegetables into Talia's bowl, as if to soften the weight of her words. Her father simply nodded, his face masked by a strained smile. At that moment, Talia hesitated. She had thought they would be happy to see her embark on her independent journey, but instead, they wanted her to stay. "Things are getting harder by the day," her mother added, her voice slightly trembling. "Electricity, water. The pension doesn't cover it anymore, and your father and we're not as strong as we used to be." As they spoke, the brilliant plans in her mind slowly faded. Talia wasn't heartless. She remembered every sacrifice they had made to raise her, the nights her mother patched up old sweaters so she could have something warm to wear to class. And just like that, a quiet agreement slipped from her lips. "I'll stay and help with some of the expenses." Her parents' eyes lit up. "1,000 a month, if that's okay?" her father asked cautiously. She nodded. From that moment on, at just 22 years old, Talia became the financial pillar of the family. She began living more frugally, rarely buying anything beyond basic necessities, and a few small self-rewards at the end of each month. Every time she transferred money into the savings account, she felt reassured she was doing the right thing. But what she didn't realize during those seemingly stable months was that this initial commitment would evolve into an invisible chain tightening around each step she took, every dream she held, every ounce of autonomy she had. And it would be the beginning of a slow-burning betrayal within the very home she once called her safe haven. Miranda had always been the embodiment of glamour, from high school evenings spent at dinner parties in metallic dresses to now, as a mother of one, she maintained the same air. She lived with her husband Colin in a rented apartment in downtown Oakwood City, where the rent was higher than their combined income, but that never seemed to trouble her. Miranda's life was guided by the belief that others would always find a way to make things work for her. And if they didn't, a little drama, a few cleverly phrased complaints, or a well-timed glance would do the rest. Talia knew exactly what kind of person her sister was. She didn't hate Miranda. She simply knew she could never live like her. Every weekend, Miranda still dropped by their family home, usually unannounced, always with a handbag far too large for a short visit. She sprawled out on the living room sofa, phone in hand, music playing softly from a Bluetooth speaker, not to enjoy, but as if the world around her needed reminding of her dazzling presence. Talia, are you still wearing that old sweater? Miranda sighed, her eyes darting up briefly before returning to the screen. Didn't you post a photo in that last year? Talia glanced down at her pale gray sweater, simple, clean, not a hole in sight, and nodded without replying. To Miranda, wearing the same clothes signaled stagnation. To Talia, it meant freedom. The freedom not to spend on what wasn't necessary. But what troubled Talia more than the backhanded comments was the way her sister always approached her with calculated sweetness. Talia, Miranda whispered one afternoon as they were washing dishes, "Could you lend me $250? There's a new Ardent and Row coat on sale that I've had my eye on for a month, but things are a bit tight right now." Requests like these happened so often that Talia sometimes couldn't remember the last time. Yet she still opened her wallet, still made the transfers. Because each time Miranda would squeeze her shoulder and smile, "You're honestly the only one in this family I can trust." The problem was she wasn't the only one. She was just the only one with a stable income, the only one saving money, and the only one who didn't know how to say no. Miranda didn't need much of a reason to ask for money, because she believed that in families, you didn't have to ask, you just received. And Talia, out of affection, out of discomfort, out of thinking my sister's just going through a rough patch, became an unconditional bank for fleeting indulgences she herself had never dared to touch. But inside her, something had begun to shift quietly and steadily, like a small scratch that didn't hurt yet, but was sure to spread. It was a midweek evening, the rain had just stopped, and the street was still streaked with reflections from headlights and puddles that hadn't yet drained. Talia left the office earlier than usual because the company's internal system was undergoing maintenance. She was quietly pleased, more time to rest, maybe a cup of ginger tea, and the half-finished book on her shelf. But the moment her car turned onto the familiar street, she sensed something was wrong. In front of the house were three unfamiliar cars, one of which was the beige SUV Colin often drove. The porch light was brightly lit, the front door ajar, and a cardboard box had been wedged in to keep it open. No one had ever done that before. She stepped inside and was immediately surrounded by a chaos she had never seen. The living room was full of boxes, suitcases, handbags, and children's toys, still with price tags. Her mother was spreading a blanket over the sofa, while her father fumbled with adjusting the dining table. On the floor, little Finn, her nephew, was running around with a brand new toy car, and Miranda stood amid the luggage issuing directions as if this were a formal moving rehearsal. "Talia, you're home, perfect timing." Her sister's voice floated in light as a cloud, as if there was nothing here that required explanation. Colin passed by in the hallway holding a pot, looking so exhausted he didn't dare meet her eyes. "What's going on?" Talia stood frozen, silent, her eyes scanning the once familiar space now in disarray. Miranda shrugged, breezy. "Colin got his contract terminated just like that." "Horrible, can you believe it? A so-called friend of his?" "Some friend, huh? Reported him to the boss for abusing access to the advance fund." But really, he just borrowed a few thousand temporarily. He was going to pay it back right away. Talia stopped at the word borrowed. In the heavy silence, her eyes searched her parents, hoping they would offer something reasonable to say, or at least an apology for not asking her before allowing an entire other family, even if it was her sister's, to move in. But all she got were hesitant nods and evasive glances. "We're just staying here temporarily," her mother said, her voice soft but firm. "Just until Miranda and Colin get back on their feet financially." She didn't react, not with anger, not with tears. She simply lifted her work bag onto her shoulder and walked toward her room. Now wide open, her belongings moved, and the neatly folded bedding replaced by children's toys. Talia didn't need anyone to say another word. She understood all too clearly that from now on, this house was no longer a place of peace. It would be the beginning of a quiet challenge. And she, the one who paid the electricity, the water, the groceries, would no longer be seen as the center of anything at all. Ever since Miranda and her family moved in the house, Talia had tried so hard to preserve as a sanctuary of quiet, had turned into a non-stop transit station. Every morning, the clatter of the coffee machine, Collins groaning about a new job that was not worth the paycheck, the crash of toys on the wooden floor, and Miranda yelling for little Finn to put on his clothes, all blended into a chaotic soundtrack with no end. Talia still woke up early like she always had, still sat down at her laptop on time, still quietly paid most of the household bills. But more and more she felt like she was living on the margins of a family play in which she was no longer the main character, not even a supporting one. Dinner became a ritual that Talia couldn't avoid, even though every time she sat down at the table it meant swallowing a string of petty critiques from her sister. "Mom, the chicken's a bit dry today." Miranda sighed, poking her fork into the plate with a frown. "Remember how we used to eat at DeLuca's? They marinated it with lemon and rosemary. Absolutely delicious. Who knows when we'll get to eat proper food again?" Their mother said nothing, just offered a strained smile and mumbled an apology as if she had ruined someone else's entire day. Talia looked down at her own plate, perfectly cooked, well seasoned, and with absolutely nothing to complain about, but she stayed silent. Saying anything would only pull the conversation into an endless cycle of bickering rebuttals, and finally those pitiful looks cast at Miranda as if she were life's greatest victim. But what drained Talia the most wasn't the complaints, it was the strange vanishing of boundaries. Miranda began entering her room without knocking. Finn piled his toys on her bed and burst out laughing when caught. Colin used her computer to check work emails despite being reminded no less than 3 times. And one night, while she was working on a report at 10 p.m., Talia heard her mother whisper to her father in the hallway. Talia's always glued to that screen. Who knows when she'll finally settle down and get married? She stopped typing. Her heart didn't ache, just sank like the weightless drop you feel when you've heard the same criticism too many times. It no longer had sharp edges. It had become a dull, persistent hum in the background of daily life. In that house, every inconvenience of Miranda's was treated like a crisis that needed rescuing. But Talia's exhaustion was dismissed as irritability. Every time she offered a suggestion or voiced a concern, her mother would sigh. "You have to be understanding, your sister has a young child." But did anyone ever stop to consider that Talia too was carrying a child of her own, this entire family on her back? And not once had anyone asked her, "Are you tired?" Each night when the house had gone dark, the TV in the living room silent, and little Finn's footsteps no longer echoed down the hallway, that was when Talia's real day began. Not the work at Quantum Grid where she met every metric with precision during office hours, but her own project, the one she had nurtured since junior year of college, an AI-powered home security system called Guardian Core. Under the soft amber glow of her desk lamp and a steaming mug of tea, she quietly typed lines of code, mapped out data architecture blocks, tested machine learning algorithms to ensure the system wasn't just intelligent, but discerning enough to tell the difference between a dog hopping a fence and a real intruder. To her, it wasn't just an app. It was a way to reclaim a sense of control in a life that had become increasingly chaotic and encroached upon. She didn't tell anyone about the project, not because she wanted to keep it secret, but because she knew all too well in that house, her late-night hours in front of a computer would only be seen as playing games again or wasting time on nonsense. Once her mother walked into the room, caught sight of a screen full of complex code, and merely said, "Still not asleep at this hour. What are you working so hard for?" No one even notices. Then turned and walked away, not waiting for a response. Talia didn't bother to reply. Explaining would only exhaust her further. She chose silence, letting the misunderstanding drift by, the way one ignores a tiny scratch to preserve the smooth surface of glass. There were nights that stretched until 2 or 3 in the morning, her eyes blurred with fatigue, but her hands still typing without pause. Each time she completed a new feature like a customizable voice alert system or a remote control interface for elderly users, she felt a piece of her identity return in a place where she was being reduced to a quiet figure who paid for everything but was never thanked. She tested the system on her home cameras, noting how the AI responded to each movement, each unusual sound. Every successful result made her smile. No one saw it, but it was the only kind of happiness in her day that wasn't taken by someone else. Talia didn't realize just how much of herself she had poured into Guardian Core, until that morning when she submitted the prototype to Mr. Voss, the head of research at Quantum Grid, as part of the company's annual internal showcase. Just minutes after experiencing the system, his expression completely changed. "You built this on your own?" He asked, his voice a mix of astonishment and admiration. "This is the kind of technology the entire home security market is chasing." She nodded, her throat dry with nerves. Then he extended his hand. "Talia, I'm taking this straight to the CEO. If everything goes well, the company is prepared to buy full ownership with a starting offer of $500,000 plus a percentage of product revenue over the first 5 years." In that moment, in a room brightly lit by ceiling lights with technical diagrams still glowing on the screen, Talia knew that her months of silent effort, the sleepless nights, the endurance, the quiet endurance, had finally opened a door for her to step out of the role of the one who stays behind and pays the bills. But she didn't tell anyone, because this time she wanted to be the one who chose who would know and who wouldn't. Talia once thought the worst thing in this house was the silence, but she had been wrong. It was the sheer audacity that made one choke. That day, she returned home after a long meeting at the office, her mind still consumed with calculating the terms for the app acquisition deal. She walked into the house caught between excitement and exhaustion, hoping for some rest in a familiar corner, however small. But then she froze when she saw the hallway packed with her belongings, boxes of books, her backpack, a few random bags, even her beloved sleep pillow and the faded teddy bear she'd kept since high school. Everything had been shoved outside as if she were a delinquent tenant behind on rent. She hurried toward her room only to stop dead in her tracks. The door was wide open, and inside the minimalist space she had carefully arranged was gone. In its place were superhero bedsheets, cartoon posters plastered across the walls, a small study desk with a box of colored pencils and toy cars scattered across the floor. Finn sat in the middle of the bed playing on a tablet like it was naturally his world. He looked up and squealed with joy. "Auntie Talia, did you see my new room? Mommy said I'm going to sleep here from now on." Before she could react, Miranda appeared behind her arms, crossed her tone light as if announcing a change of bed sheets. "Finn's old room is too small. There's no space for his stuff. You work a lot, anyway. Probably don't need a private room that much, right?" Talia tried to stay composed, though her throat had already tightened. "What about Finn's old room?" she asked, each word dropping slowly. Miranda gave a dry smile, not bothering to hide her satisfaction. "Oh, you know I have so many things. Clothes, cosmetics, it's exhausting being cramped all the time. It'll be my dressing room now. I'll keep it tidy." When their mother stepped in, lightly clutching the hem of her shirt and avoiding Talia's eyes, Talia understood this hadn't been a spontaneous decision. It had been discussed, agreed upon, and carried out quietly while she was away. "We just wanted Finn to have space to study and play." Her mother whispered, her voice laced with guilt, as if she still believed it was a reasonable compromise. She looked at each person in the house, some avoiding her gaze, others pretending not to be involved, then looked back at her own things tossed into the hallway. No one had asked if she agreed. No one had given her notice. No one thought that the person paying $2,000 a month to keep this roof over their heads deserved to keep her own room. And in that very moment, amidst the restrained fury and the piercing sense of betrayal, Talia didn't scream and she didn't cry. She just smiled, a small, cold, razor-edged smile, and replied gently as if telling a joke, "It's all right. I won't be sleeping on the sofa. I'll be sleeping in my new apartment. That sentence dropped into the room like a soft thud, yet it was enough to shake the entire house. Miranda burst out laughing instantly, a laugh laced with mockery and disbelief, as if she'd just heard a mythological tale. A new apartment? Come on, Talia, don't joke. She scoffed, her eyes gleaming with smugness. No one who just started working supporting the whole family has enough money to afford a place of their own. But Talia didn't argue. She didn't need to. She simply turned around, walked down to the living room, pulled out her phone, and called the moving company. Her voice was calm, steady, and without a hint of hesitation. I need to move out first thing tomorrow morning. Upstairs, everything is packed. The new address is 16B Riverside Towers. When she hung up, the entire family had gathered in the living room, eyes filled with a mix of confusion, unease, and quiet panic. Talia, her father, said, as he emerged from the garage still holding a repair kit he hadn't yet put away about the room. If you're not happy, we can talk it through. There's no need to leave like this. She looked at him, the man who had once set aside all his youthful dreams to raise a family, but today he had chosen silence when others made decisions in place of his daughter. I'm not leaving because of the room, she said, her voice gentle but firm. I'm leaving because I've realized I'm not respected. I live here. I pay. I keep everything running, but I have no say. Her mother reached out as if to touch her shoulder, then stopped midway. No one said anything more, and this time the silence wasn't avoidance, it was acknowledgement. That night, Talia barely slept. She gathered the last of her personal belongings, photos stuck to her cabinet, a few technical books, the set of colored markers she had loved since college. Each item reminded her of a former version of herself, the girl who once believed that family was the last place on earth where one should ever feel out of place. The next morning, exactly at 7 a.m., the truck arrived. Two movers rang the doorbell, and as they began to carry each box out to the truck, her family stood silently in the living room watching like they couldn't quite believe this was really happening. Miranda still tried to maintain a composed look, but the quick glance she cast toward their mother betrayed the anxiety cracking beneath her polished facade. When everything was loaded, Talia looked back at the house one last time, not with regret, but to close the chapter. You're really going? Colin asked, speaking for the first time throughout all the tense days. Talia smiled. I already did the moment everyone made a decision for me without asking. Then she turned away, stepped out the door with one bag, one apartment ownership contract, and a freedom that had never felt more real. 3 days after Talia moved out, her family called her back to the house to talk. The meeting took place on a midweek evening just after she'd left work, the lingering scent of espresso from the office coffee machine still clinging to her sleeve. The moment she stepped through the doorway, she sensed something was off. Everyone was present, seated neatly around the dining table as if a strategic meeting was about to begin. Her mother spoke first, her gaze softening, though her voice carried a tone of pleading wrapped in gentleness. Talia, you know our family is really struggling right now. Ever since there have been 5 adults and 1 child in the house, the expenses have skyrocketed. Electricity, water, food, everything has gone up. You know that $1,000 a month isn't enough anymore. Could you help a little more? Talia sat quietly, hands clasped beneath the table. Her father continued, this time more direct. What your mother means is, if you could increase your support to $2,000 a month, it would really ease the pressure. She looked around the table. Miranda was intently studying her freshly done nails. Colin stared down at the tiled floor, avoiding everyone's eyes. She asked gently, how much are Miranda and Colin contributing? The question silenced the table. Her mother finally replied softly, she's busy taking care of Finn, so she can't really work much. And Colin, he just switched jobs. Things aren't stable yet. And then, like the final drop that spills the glass, Miranda looked up and said, without hesitation, Talia, you're living alone. You don't have anything to worry about. Your apartment is brand new while I have a child. Don't you think you could share that space with your family? At that moment, Talia could only look at her sister in stunned disbelief. Miranda didn't even seem embarrassed. Instead, she continued, "If you really cared, the least you could do is consider giving Finn a better place to live. We're family, after all." Talia laughed out loud for the first time during the entire conversation. Not from joy, but because the shamelessness had truly surpassed anything she could have imagined. "No, Miranda. I will not give my apartment to anyone. And if you're hoping for anything other than that, then I think it's time to let go of that hope." The atmosphere shifted from expectation to disappointment to anger. Her parents remained silent, but Miranda did not. Honestly, her sister said, her voice rising, "You hid the fact that you had enough money to buy a place. You clearly saved up for a long time. You're selfish. You pulled away and left nothing behind." But Talia simply smiled. "I pulled away from a life where kindness is constantly measured against what others need. No one asks what I need. They only ask how much I can give." And this time she stood up from the table, not waiting for anyone to say anything more. She had carried the role of the responsible one long enough. Now was the time to shed that role, not out of anger, but with a clarity that refused to keep compromising. The next morning, Talia stepped into her new office at Riverside Towers, a one-bedroom apartment bathed in sunlight with a small balcony overlooking the park, where she could sip her morning coffee and watch the city wake in peace. The last moving boxes had been unpacked, books lined up on the shelves, her desk pushed against the window, and the gray upholstered chair she had once dreamed of owning now sat in the corner of the room, a reward to herself. No one criticized her for waking up early to work. There were no sporadic footsteps or toys scattered underfoot. Only silence, the kind that had once been a luxury in her old home, now became her most treasured possession. She turned off her phone for 3 full days as a way of re-establishing the boundary between herself and the world that had suffocated her. When she turned it back on, dozens of messages lit up her screen, most from her mother and Miranda, repeating the same emotional cycles she knew too well: anger, blame, guilt, then pleading. Some were short. "If you still think you're part of this family, come back." Others dragged on. "I don't understand how you became so cold. Nothing hurts more than family treating each other like strangers." Talia read every word, not with anger, not with sadness, but with clarity. All this time, the only tie between her and that family had been her wallet, something they never believed she had the right to keep for herself. 1 week later, she decided to return, not to reconcile, but to close the chapter. She arrived on a Saturday morning just in time for breakfast, carrying a slim folder and a calm expression. The moment the door opened, her mother rushed over and hugged her like nothing had ever happened. Miranda was already seated in the living room. Arms crossed, her gaze as sharp as ever. Her father invited her to sit this time without evasion. "We've thought it over," he said. "If you're uncomfortable, your old room will be returned to you. And the apartment? If you want to keep it, then keep it. But you can still help the family, can't you?" Talia nodded slightly. "I've done a lot of thinking. And yes, I won't be contributing another cent." She opened the folder and pulled out a sheet of paper. "I've sold the rights to the Guardian Core application to Quantum Grid. Starting price was $500,000 plus a share of the revenue. Contract signed. Payment received." The room fell silent. Miranda froze. "What did you say? That thing you were clacking away at every night? That was real?" Talia nodded. "The thing you once called a waste of time?" "Yes." No one said another word. There was nothing left to argue. She looked at each person around her, the ones who had seen her as a financial source, an endless support system, and gently said, "I'll always be your daughter. But I'm not this family's bank. Not anymore." She stood up and left the old house, no anger, no dramatic goodbye. just a door quietly closing, making space for a real life to begin. 6 months later, her days were full, each step hers alone, each decision made without needing anyone's approval. And the old family, the place that once was home, had become her deepest lesson. Sometimes, in order to be kind to yourself, you must be brave enough to walk away from the ties labeled as kinship. Talia once believed that preserving a family only required trying hard enough. But then she realized not all sacrifices are met with love. Sometimes they only feed bottomless demands. Through silence and resolve, she didn't just reclaim her freedom, she reclaimed her worth. Not through blame, but with decisive action. She didn't need anyone's validation nor anyone's apology. Because in the end, growing up isn't about accepting everything, it's about knowing when to walk away. If you've ever been in a situation like Talia's, used under the guise of family, overlooked even as you carried everything, remember this: you have the right to choose your place. And sometimes that choice is the very first step toward real freedom. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video with someone who might need a reason to live for themselves, because everyone deserves a life that's respected.